campus craziness, safe spaces, microaggressions, you know the routine. We all know about Middlebury and Evergreen and Yale and the Halloween costumes and and so forth. So I just had Jonathan Haidt on my Science Salon podcast and said, I'm not 100% sure I'm on board with your thesis in the book. Love the book. Everything you said in it is true about everything that's happened. But when I go to Chapman University, where I teach, I never see anything going on. It's just students walking around doing their thing. You're at Harvard. I mean, if I went to Harvard tomorrow, would there be protests and riots? And, probably not. Probably just. So I'm not 100% clear that this is really a crisis. Or is it just something that's kind of moving in the direction of like we should pay attention to this and try to nip it in the bud, but let's not get apocalyptic about it?
Yeah, I tend to think it is a problem. I don't know if it's a crisis, but I think it is a problem that a certain range of ideas really are virtually impossible to discuss within the American university system. That certain issues about sexual assault, on race, on crime, they're just certain hypotheses that where you just don't go there. And I think it is distorting the debate. It's also with these excesses, such as the woman shrieking about the Halloween costumes and cursing a professor because his wife dared to say that students should figure out which Halloween costumes they should wear on their own without the university imposing regulations. What it does is it saps the credibility of the academy across the board. And this is red meat for Fox News and the extreme right, and even the not so extreme American right. I'm sure that you've had kind of conversations that I've had, sometimes had with thoughtful, intelligent people on the political right who say things like, well, given that the university is no longer a disinterested forum, right, but there are certain orthodoxies, there is absolute repression, people losing their jobs, getting physically assaulted based on what they say. Why should we take anything seriously coming out of a university? Why should you tell me that the vast majority of climate scientists believe that human activity is warming the planet possibly catastrophically? Well, I'm willing to accept that 98% of scientists believe that, but they're all in a university where craziness prevails.
Right.
So I think we have the obligation to secure the credibility of the academy. Now this, in fact, as we know, this happens not to be true among climate scientists. They're really not overcome with political correctness. They really are doing the science. But the reputation of the university as a whole is at stake. And there are probably some issues where we really are doing the wrong thing. As Heather McDonald points out, the depolicing following the highly publicized Ferguson police shooting probably led to a bounce in the American homicide rate, so that probably an extra 1,000 to 2,000 people were murdered in each of the last 3 years since Ferguson because of the widespread attacks on the police. Most of those, by the way, or a good percentage of those are African American. If we can't talk about whether there really is racial bias in police shootings and whether the all-out demonization of police has costs as well as benefits, people will die. Now that's a conversation that Heather McDonald, coming from an independent think tank, can say, but she probably would not be able to say that in most universities. Yeah. So that is a problem.
That is a problem. So viewpoint diversity seems to be the solution. I don't know if this can be done just by bringing in guest speakers that are conservatives or something like that, particularly if they get deplatformed.
Affirmative action for conservatives.
Yeah, no, I know.
I don't think that's that itself is the answer. Yeah.
When I was a professor at Occidental College, late 80s, early 90s, they were bringing in a lot of liberal speakers. I said, well, why don't you bring in someone like Rush Limbaugh? They looked at me like, have you lost your mind? It's like, yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan, but at least he's got something else to say on the other side. Anyway.
So I think the answer is certainly not to bring in provocateurs like Rush Limbaugh and
Milo Yiannopoulos.
Forget it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people who are kind of trolls who deliberately stoke outrage.
Yeah.
There's a difference between them and serious scholars who have highly unorthodox views, like Heather McDonald, like Charles Murray, who could defend what they say, who are clearly not earning a living by getting people riled up. but actually are sincerely making an argument. But there also has to be, I think, a recognition simply of the fact that political orthodoxy can, as one magazine put it, make you stupid. And there are studies that show this. You give people a table of numbers, and you say this is the results of a study as to whether skin cream is effective at reducing a rash, or whether this is a study on whether gun control is effective at reducing crime. And depending on whether you're on the right or the left, you read the numbers in the skin cream study accurately. It's not the case that the left or the right is more innumerate, but when you politicize the issue, then people on the right will misread the numbers as showing that gun control doesn't affect crime, even when the numbers show it does, and vice versa. So we're actually doing bad scholarship and bad science when we let ourselves become infected with a priori views as to which policies are likely to succeed or fail.
Yeah.
So the idea that we have that this is simply to do, that there's a systematic source of error, inaccuracy, fallacy, if we accept an orthodoxy on the left or the right, has to be part of the common knowledge of being a thinker, an analyst, an intellectual, an informed citizen.
Let's finish with just leaving everybody with an actionable idea. What can we do? And I'll approach it from two aspects, personal and then sort of socially or politically, about changing people's minds. This is, how do you talk someone out of a crazy belief? And so, I mentioned to you, I got this correspondence with this woman who's got a couple of young kids. They own their own, her and her husband own their own business. He injured his back and then got involved with some opioid painkiller stuff and all that. Anyway, none of that's quite the... He got involved with a UFO cult type group that believes that the Pleiadians are here and they're aiding the government, which could explain the current administration.
Maybe he's right.
Yeah. Maybe he's right. The Pleiadians, they're crazy. So she's at her wit's end. I don't want to leave the guy. I love him. My kids are young and we have business. How do I talk him out of believing that, the aliens are here, and a whole bunch of other things, multidimensional beings and channelers and crystals, the whole package. Which is, kind of what I do as my, day job at Skeptic, but it really touches on the whole debiasing literature you summarize in Enlightenment Now. You're at a cocktail party talking to a climate denier or a creationist or an anti-GMO person or whatever. What do you say other than, here are the facts, you should just believe the facts? This isn't going to work for this woman and talking to her husband. He said, you just don't know what I know.
Yeah. No, it is I think, an unsolved problem. And I mean, Michael wrote a book called Why People Believe Weird Things. And that was before the events of the last few years. That was what, 1997? 1997.
Yeah. And they're still weird.
And they're new weird things. I mean, they're the chemtrail people. When you see jets with those contrails behind them in the sky, did you know what those really are? That is the government gassing us all into submission.
Right.
And there are people who are serious about this. But we are living in an odd time of, I don't know if it's, I don't think that we're becoming more irrational, but, and of course you have many examples of madness of crowds in the past, but there may be more kind of rationality inequality. That at the top end, we have things like PolitiFact, fact-checking of politicians' statements as a routine mandatory part of journalism, which didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago. And the people who run it say that there is a massive demand for fact-checking, which did not exist. And this was even before Donald Trump was elected, that there's a change in what consumers of journalism expect and what journalists feel that they ought to do. You've got things like Snopes.com, which refutes urban legends. You've got Skeptic magazine, and I assume the magazine has been doing quite well. You've got Wikipedia. I mean, this crazy idea of having an encyclopedia curated by volunteers with no one in charge. And there are very few conspiracy theories or Holocaust denial or crazy stuff on Wikipedia. So at one end, you've got these enormous resources for rationality. Then at the other end, you've got the chemtrails and the Pizzagate and the Alex Jones
Right.
and so on.
Right.
Now, it may be, we know that simply, for someone who's in the grips of one of these beliefs, simply trying to persuade them with the facts and reason tends not to work. There are people who are kind of in the fringes, in the gray area, where facts may persuade them. There are also maybe other ways that if you get a spokesperson for a cause who is of the opposite ideological camp, you find someone on the right who says, well, maybe there is human-made climate change. That is more likely to persuade people who deny it than throwing more facts at them. Because when you throw facts at them, then you just get into kind of litigation where someone who is passionate about a particular position can always muster through clever spin doctoring and litigating, can always create a persuasive case if they are well enough versed in the arts of persuasion.
Yeah.
There may also be, and I know we should be turning it over to audience Q&A, it may also be that when there's a new medium that allows information to proliferate, now it's social media, but a few hundred years ago it was the printing press. In between it was the mass-produced newspaper. There's often a Wild West period in which all kinds of crazy ideas get spread. It did happen with the rise of the printing press. A lot of people claimed that they had long-lost books of the Bible that were total fabrications. There was rampant plagiarism and Protocols of the Elders of Zion just 100 years ago, promulgated by the Tsarist secret police that many people to this day believe, but they certainly believed it in the past. And that it takes a while for this new arena of discourse to arrive at norms and institutions that prevent the crazies from taking it over and that kind of steer it in the direction of vetted proof and argument and fact-checking.
Along the lines of decoupling the claim from political or religious affiliations, like you mentioned, climate change being affiliated with Al Gore was, bad for...
It was disaster for the awareness of climate change.
You lost half the country right there.
He made it a left-wing cause.
Right,
yeah.
So at this debate I did in the church, I could tell in the Q&A that there were still a lot of young Earth creationists, and they weren't buying evolution. They were giving me the second law of thermodynamics and the eye and all that. So I said, have you heard of the Human Genome Project and the National Institutes of Health? They're headed by this guy who completely accepts evolution, and he's a born-again evangelical Christian. He loves Jesus just like you.
Yeah.
And I said, read his
Collins.
book. Yeah.
Francis Collins.
Francis Collins. So it's like he's on your team. Don't believe me because I'm an atheist, but believe this guy. And so they're trying to find common cause at least through someone on your team, because it's so hard to get past the team idea.
Yeah, so that is a provably effective tactic.
And also, don't tell people they're idiots. You're a moron to believe that. The conversation's pretty much over.
Yeah.
No ad Hitlerum. The moment you call somebody Hitler, it's over. And try to understand. I can understand why you hold that position, and try to articulate it. I do that, because I'd say, well, I was kind of a climate skeptic in the '90s. I wasn't sure, so I totally see where you're coming from. Oh. What changed your mind? Well, I read some literature and I did this and that. Oh. And then they look at me like, oh, could this happen to me? It's like, yeah. Well, we've been going an hour. Thank you so much for listening to us have a conversation here. We really appreciate that. And thank you. Thank you so much. So Travis, if you want to set up the Q&A, we'll rock and roll with you. I think they have microphones. Looks like there's a mic here if you want to start lining up, and maybe one there if you want to line up. These are the hard questions over here, and these are the easy questions over here. And in the meantime, just psychically talk amongst yourselves. What's that? Oh, yeah. And do you want to let me know when to start? Okay, we can start? Yep. Okay. Ma'am, you go first.
You want to start with a hard question or
yeah,
an easy
sure.
question?
Go ahead.
I have a comment and a question. My comment was to the effect of helping people out of, what one would consider beliefs that are not useful. And I think a joke would be that to give them another crazy belief, because when you fall in love with another one, you might let go of the first one.
Okay.
But on a less funny tone, I think that people are taken with ideas because they make them feel useful, they give them something to do, and it makes them think that they're doing something which helps others. So I think that if you go to the psychological benefits of why they hold that belief, that might be a way to help see how could they can be useful and helping others and feeling that they're competent, on other ways. So if you can fill the same voids psychologically that those things give, then you might be more willing to do the other things that might not be crazy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm fond of saying no one in the history of the world has ever joined a cult. They join a group that they think is good, it's going to help them personally, it's going to save the world and help the poor, whatever. So there, at least if you think about it from that perspective, you can say, okay, let's try to figure out what the reason was that they got involved, and then 10 years later they drank the Kool-Aid.
And the question,
Yeah.
I guess I have too many, I'd probably need a chair up there, but I think morality is a bit of a moving target depending on culture, time, and whatever. And yesterday I was at a gathering with friends, and a lady told me her daughter works in a company, a fashion company here that has its headquarters here in Montreal. And she was saying how the employees there are evaluated not only on their performance, for example, in sales or whatever jobs they do, but they're also evaluated, their employee evaluation, yearly evaluations are also done based on whether they take care of their health. They are given points if they are vegetarian or vegan, not using their cars, if they stop smoking and things like that. I'd like to have your impressions on that, because this is in an actual incorporation and it's not considered crazy by the people doing it. Thank you.
Well, I think there's several things going on there. There certainly is. We're seeing a bit of a shift where the ability of corporations to police themselves based on widespread moral norms is increasing. Sometimes called the movement of conscientious capitalism, where companies are trying to move away from the model that their only responsibility is to maximize shareholder value, which is kind of a psychopathic vision of what a company ought to be doing. And of course, there are many owners of companies who have always disavowed that very narrow mission. Of course, there also is a self-interested reason why companies might want their employees to be healthier, both so that they show up and, well, more so in the American system where a lot of health insurance is underwritten by companies. They have an interest in keeping their employees healthy. And there could be a line where at some point it becomes kind of paternalism, where you really don't want your company telling you what you should eat and what you should smoke, and the Japanese model in which all the employees show up for calisthenics every morning and in identical jumpsuits may be going too far in terms of corporations.
It sounds like a good thing, but I don't see when it enters into the evaluations.
Yep.
Yes, that seems, yeah.
All right, we got to move on.
Thank you very
We
much.
got to go back and forth. Just quick questions. Here we go.
Hi. At the risk of posing an unanswerable question, this has something to do with the topic you touched at the end. It seems that in talking about specific problems like identity politics and stuff, cloud people's thinking, obviously something you touched on during the talk, what could we do to encourage kind of core intellectual healthy habits? Stuff like being really receptive to good arguments, considering people's viewpoints fairly. It seems like that would be a kind of a bedrock fix that would kind of bleed out into other domains of thought, and sort of tackling specific problems would be a lot easier if everyone kind of had a core of intellectual good habits. Is this just an intractable problem that certain people, for whatever reason, cannot reason correctly? Because saying the kind of things that you're saying in front of a crowd, if you were to run for public office, it would be terrible. It would be, it would be a lost cause. Obviously, there's certain factual information and reasoning that's, for whatever reason, radioactive, and it needn't be. So, you know, perhaps this is just a brute fact, but what do you see that we could help to get us to move past that?
Yeah, there's one question about how do we try to get certain norms to proliferate in discourse among educated people. And I think just identifying, at least a start would be to identify the idea that ideological conformity, that a monoculture of ideas, repression of criticism are all intellectually toxic, and that they lead us into a fallacy. And we shouldn't be so fatalistic about the possibility of being unable to improve the quality of discourse that we just sort of match demagoguery with demagoguery and say people are irrational, there's nothing we can do about it. There are many ways in which society has become more, or people as a whole become more rational. We know that IQ scores have been increasing. This is known as the Flynn effect. People actually are better at abstract reasoning. They have concepts like the statistical average, like a trade-off, like a win-win situation that were unknown decades ago. If you go back to, and again, I don't know how many of you covered in why people believe weird things, but if you go back to even congressional testimony 100 years ago, you have arguments that are truly idiotic even by today's standards. So you could have, say, a senator saying that we should restrict immigration because God gave Africa to the black people and Asia to the yellow people and Europe to the white people. And true, he gave the Americas to the red people, but we stole it from them fair and square. And that's why, that's why we should have no Chinese immigrating to the United States. Now, even by today's standards, that's pretty dumb. So and there are many ways, you know, people don't believe in unicorns, and people will bring their kids to a doctor rather than an exorcist. So it's not that it can't be done at all. Now, in the political arena, the challenges are somewhat different. A politician has to appeal to the largest possible coalition. There are many ways for a politician to commit a gaffe, which of course is defined as when a politician says something that's true. And there is an art of messaging, and there is also an art of being optimistic without being complacent. And we know that it's possible because there have been successful politicians both on the left and the right who've done it. Barack Obama, who had the hope and change, and who had a line that I cribbed for as an epigraph for one of the chapters of my book. If you had to pick a time to be alive and you didn't know whether you'd be, what country you'd be born in, or whether you'd be black or white, man or woman, you'd choose now. Ronald Reagan, on the other side, was famously optimistic. So it's countering the fatalism, the pessimism, the tribalism is not hopeless. And there may be, we know that there are specific techniques of shaking people out of their cognitive biases. And we also know that various norms and ideas can proliferate. And it's got to start with universities and journalists and people whose ideas get a wide audience.
Yeah, the idea of a liberal arts education, that's what's behind it, and more people get that now than before. I'm super encouraged of the new media and the numbers that podcasters are putting up for long-form conversations like what we just did here, or Joe Rogan talking to Elon Musk for 2.5 hours. I mean, that, to me, the fact that there, 10 million people watch this, there's a hunger for real depth of thought amongst many, many millions of people. So this whole TV idea, I talked to a lot of television producers pitching shows and stuff, and they all still think the average American viewer is an idiot and they have attention span of 30 seconds. Don't tell them what we really know. Just give them these little sound bites. No, I don't think that's right.
Thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for your company this evening. My question is in regards to whether or not you were witness to Mr. Jordan Peterson's and Mr. Sam Harris's recent debates in Vancouver, Dublin, as well as London, and the quality of their debates regarding trying to find middle ground between religion and pure atheists.
Oh boy. Well, I think that's yet another example of what I just said. There's a hunger for that. We have the next issue of Skeptic that comes out next week in bookstores, and then we'll post the articles online. It has a section on Jordan Peterson, really the Jordan Peterson phenomenon that we're interested in. So much has already been written about this specific idea or that thing he said or whatever. We're interested in, why is there such a huge following? I went to one of his live events in Thousand Oaks in Southern California a few months ago. This is not a group of right-wing young men looking to, be shitsters out there. No. People are really interested in what he has to say. Why? Well, it might touch on the appeal of storytelling, narrative, film. Why do people find that so appealing more than, say, nonfiction books? And in part because he's putting some intellectual horsepower behind the idea that stories are meaningful and important. And we would agree to that. Now, where Jordan kind of slips over into the gray area there is, where he's not super clear about if he's just talking about, it's a metaphor and I'm not claiming it's real. So, I've talked to him and, do you believe in God, Jordan? Well, this would take me 40 hours to answer. It's like, no. Ask me. The answer is no, okay? It's not even 1 second. Okay, so, it depends what you mean by the resurrection. If it's, a metaphor for suffering, no. I mean, that's fine. But was there a guy named Jesus? Was he crucified? Probably yes, probably yes. Did he rise from the dead? Okay, we're off the page of reality there once you go down that path. So there, I think he gets into trouble. But obviously, there's something else that has nothing to do with that appeals to people.
Hi. So my question is about artificial intelligence. You've been talking about Elon Musk's appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast. And so I was wondering, from your respective backgrounds, what you make of artificial intelligence as it relates to progress. And also I'd like to add the idea that to make progress, for example, in medicine, with artificial intelligence, we need to become a more data-centric society. And so I'd like to know what you think of that, maybe from a moral standpoint. Or
Yeah. Well, I think the potential of artificial intelligence to improve the human condition is just spectacular. Robotics could eliminate the need for a lot of labor that no one particularly enjoys, that doesn't particularly uplift people, like picking crops, like making beds, like driving trucks. And it does pose the problem of how do we engage people whose livelihood happen to depend on them, on those particular activities. But on the other hand, society has been able to figure out what to do with people who used to be elevator operators. That's a profession that, there's a guy in department stores who'd stand all day just moving a lever back and forth so that the elevator would stop on the right floor. One can imagine at the time, concern when the automatic elevator was invented, what are we going to do with all of the elevator operators? Well, we figured out what to do with them. Even though the scale of replacement by artificial intelligence is going to be greater, some combination of universal basic income, perhaps, or income supplements, or the creation of new work always beyond the frontier of what artificial intelligence can do. Even if it's something like tutoring people in the developing world over the internet in reading and writing. I think there's always going to be lots of work to be done on the planet that will be beyond the ability of the artificial intelligence at a given time. Another question that's been raised about artificial intelligence, including by Elon Musk, although he's never really articulated what the threat is that artificial intelligence will either take over from us the way we took over from other animals, or the way that technologically powerful civilizations oppressed less powerful civilizations. I think that's, for reasons I won't get into now, but that I explain in the book, I think that's nonsense. I think it's based on a misunderstanding of what intelligence is. There's also the fear that if we empower artificial intelligence to bring about certain goals, it will interpret these goals so literally that it will make humans collateral damage. If we give it the goal of do whatever it takes to bring about world peace. Well, if you kill every human, then the planet will be in a state of peace. I also think that it's kind of nonsense to worry about that. Here I would, again, disagree strongly with Elon Musk as much as I admire him for many of his accomplishments. And in Enlightenment Now, I explain the reasons.
One of my favorite lines from your book is you describe the creatures that are intelligent that don't want to take over the world and conquer everything.
Yes, we have a name for a form of advanced intelligence that doesn't have a ruthless drive to dominate. They're called women.
Dr. Shermer, welcome to Montreal. Dr. Pinker, welcome home.
Thank you.
I actually want to appeal to both your expertise and your sensibility. I was a linguistics undergrad, and as such, I'm particularly sensitive to language dynamics, as has been inculcated in us. We live in a province that is tumultuous in terms of our language dynamics, and we're observing more. Pronoun accommodation, censorship. I characterize this all as a form of linguistic imperialism. In sociolinguistics, we are made to understand that language changes organically and on its own without prompt. However, we have Jordan Peterson making the case that they should be preserved as the plural. I'd like to know when we can distinguish between organic language change and linguistic imperialism.
Yeah, it's a there isn't a bright line. There have been reforms in language pushed for political reasons that have turned out in the long run to be pretty innocuous. The fact that we don't talk about a chairman anymore. We don't refer to the human species as man, which was very common through the 1960s. And by today's sensibilities, when you read about, well, man is an intelligent animal, and it does kind of grate today, and the language has not, and discourse has not suffered from the fact that we now talk about humanity, that we use often he or she, we talk about a letter carrier and a firefighter, and that turned out not to be linguistic fascism. We accommodated it okay. I think that there are points at which it can become so intrusive that it really feels like freedom is being impinged upon with minor benefit. And there, if for no other reason than avoiding the backlash against the effort to spread tolerance, I think people should be, who are trying to impose rapid linguistic change, should back off and let some of the change be organic. That there can be a middle ground in allowing the language to evolve in beneficial directions.
I'm of the same mind. You even see it in writing where the doctor did this and then they did that. Suddenly, that doesn't seem so bizarre a thing to do.
Is that acceptable now?
You know, well, there may also be a generational change that older people might bridle at certain things that become unexceptionable to younger generations. There are also certain uses of they which have been frowned upon by self-appointed guardians of the language that are actually perfectly grammatical and have been in the language for centuries. When we say everyone returned to their seats, for example, there are purists who would say everyone returned to his or her seat. It turns out that that's just on grammatical grounds that is bogus, and it's very easy to draw non-existent lines. That's a topic I discuss in great detail in The Sense of Style, my writing style manual.
You'll be signing it later.
Okay.
Have a good evening, gentlemen.
This is as Hitch would say, echoing Churchill probably. This is a problem up with which I shall not put.
I discussed that case. Yeah. Churchill, as it turns out, didn't say it.
He didn't say it. Oh, do we know?
As with many famous things attributed to Winston Churchill,
right.
Mark Twain, and Yogi Berra.
Do we know who said it?
Yeah, we know that he did not say it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. As Yogi Berra may or may not have said, I didn't say most of the things I said.
I've talked to Jordan a little bit about the pronoun thing. I mean, to his credit, he said, if a private citizen, individual friend or whatever came and said, I prefer that you call me whatever, he'd probably do it. It's the idea of the government forcing you to do it that he objected to. I kind of see that. When I was in college at Pepperdine, I had a roommate. His name was Dwayne, and he hated his name. So one day he announced, I'm changing my name to D'Artagnan. The fourth musketeer. I'm like, what? the what now? And he said, okay, I'll shorten it. So he finally shortened it to Dar. And that's his name, Dar, D''A''R''T. Okay, whatever, fine.
There's also a distinction within language between what linguists call the open class vocabulary, the nouns and the verbs and the names and the adjectives, and the closed class vocabulary, the articles, the prepositions, the pronouns, which are closer to the grammar, which change more slowly, and it feels more like coercion when you try to change that by external fiat.
Right.
Changing mailman to letter carrier is much easier than changing either he and she to ji or ko or na.
Right.
Yes, earlier this evening it was mentioned that there are people who have deeply held beliefs, but they're unable to articulate why they believe what they do. Now, given that there is so much dreck available in the internet, do you see a place for teaching critical thinking in the curriculum in schools? And at what age would you think that children should be taught how to think for themselves rather than just repeating and regurgitating what they hear?
Yes, and early. Definitely. I mean, that's why we published Junior Skeptic Magazine for kids, tipped into the back of Skeptic Magazine. Now we're starting to post them online, just to stand alone in case you don't want all the other skeptic stuff with the kids or the teachers or classrooms or whatever. Yeah, earlier the better, for sure. And that's why we use, Daniel Loxton's my Junior Skeptic editor, and he always uses fun stuff. I mean, like Scooby-Doo is a great skeptic television show, because like every episode they uncover the mystery. It turns out it's, the guy down the street in the mask or whatever. And so he does, Bigfoot and UFOs and aliens and all the, sort of classic paranormal pseudoscience type stuff. But as an avenue into, well, how do we know that that's not true? How do you know? How does science work anyway? And so then, so all of a sudden he's teaching how science works to kids without ever actually talking about really like critical thinking or the scientific method or inductive, deductive, and hypothetical, blah, blah, blah. Don't use the words. But just use the examples. So I think, that's definitely more is better. I teach my class at Chapman is Skepticism 101, how to think like a scientist.